In 1870, something changed. Not slowly, not gradually, all at once. Records from cities across Europe and North America begin referring to massive gold reserves as reallocated or transferred to federal custody. But the destination is never specified. And by 1875, the subject disappears from municipal archives entirely. What happened in those 5 years? And why does no public record explain where tens of thousands of metric tons of architectural gold actually went? The official narrative is consistent. It says the gold was decorative, gilding on domes, capitals, statues, and trim, removed during modernization efforts or sold to fund infrastructure. But that explanation only works if the amounts were small. They weren't. City inventories from the 1860s describe gold plating so thick it required industrial equipment to remove. In some cases, entire facades. We're not talking about leaf. We're talking about structural integration. And when you compare pre-1870 photos to post-1875 images of the same buildings, the gold is gone. But the records documenting its removal are missing too. Look at the Paris Opera House. Completed in 1875. Early interior photos show gold surfacing on columns, balustrades, ceiling panels, and door frames. By 1880, most of it has been painted over or stripped. The same pattern appears in Vienna, Berlin, St. Petersburg, Philadelphia, Chicago. In less than a decade, gold that had been publicly visible for generations is suddenly absent. Renovation is the common explanation, but renovation records from that period don't list gold as surplus or sale. They list it as reclaimed by state authority. That phrase appears again and again. Reclaimed by state authority. Not sold, not melted, reclaimed. As if it had been borrowed. As if someone else had a prior claim. Now consider the timing. The 1870s are also when World's Fairs begin displaying ancient gold artifacts in categories labeled as primitive or pre-industrial. These objects are described as rare. But photographs from the same decade show similar iconography on buildings that were supposedly brand new. Sunbursts, geometric star patterns, ornamental faces. The fairs call them antiquities. The buildings call them modern design. But the motifs are identical. So which timeline is accurate? There's another problem. The scale. A single civic building from that era could contain several tons of gold surfacing. Multiply that across hundreds of structures in dozens of cities, all stripped within the same narrow window, and you're looking at an extraction event. Not a trend. An operation. One that required coordination, labor, and equipment on a level that should have left extensive documentation. But what we find instead are gaps. Canceled contracts, disbanded work crews, archives that stop midway through a fiscal year. Some records do survive, but they're contradictory. A log from London in 1872 mentions contractors reporting to ministry officials regarding federal reclamation priorities. But there was no federal reclamation policy, at least not one made public. In Washington, a congressional budget report from 1874 includes a line item for historical material reprocessing, with no further detail. The amount listed would be worth billions today. The program is never mentioned again. Then there are the maps. Pre-1870 city plans frequently mark certain buildings with symbols that don't appear in modern legend keys. Small circles, stars, hatch marks. Post-1875 maps of the same cities show the buildings still standing, but the symbols are gone. Archivists call this cartographic updating. But updating usually means adding information. This is removal, and it's systematic. By 1880, something else becomes visible in the administrative record. A shift in terminology. Buildings that were once called public halls or civic centers are now referred to as repurposed structures or retrofitted municipal assets. Repurposed from what? Retrofitted for what? The language implies a prior function, one that is never named. What kind of event requires the simultaneous removal of precious metal from hundreds of sites across multiple continents? And why would such an effort be coordinated without public announcement, environmental review, or financial transparency? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're structural ones. The infrastructure existed. The labor existed. The material existed. But the explanation doesn't. And then there's the silence. After 1876, gold reclamation stops appearing in legislative debate. It stops appearing in newspaper archives. It stops appearing in financial disclosures. Not because the work ended. The evidence suggests it continued, but the language around it vanished. Someone decided the subject was no longer appropriate for public discussion. You can still see the anchor points, the places where gold plating was fastened to stone or steel. They're there in old civic buildings if you know what to look for. Small holes, discoloration, patterns that suggest weight and torque. The surfaces were designed to hold something, and then that something was removed, carefully, methodically, recently enough that the removal itself required planning. Old enough now that most people assume it was always bare. So where did it go? Not into private hands. There's no record of auction. Not into banking reserves. Those are audited. Not into industrial use. The refining logs don't match the volume. It went somewhere that didn't require public accountability. Somewhere that could absorb thousands of tons of material without needing to explain why. Maybe the question isn't where it went. Maybe the question is why it was there in the first place. And why, in 1870, someone decided it needed to be gone. If you've noticed something in your own city that doesn't quite fit the official story, share it in the comments. And if you want to keep following these patterns, consider subscribing. This kind of research doesn't show up in textbooks, but it's still there, waiting.